All right, welcome to today's explainer. Think of me as your guide or, your favorite science teacher for the next few minutes as we embark on a seriously epic journey. I want you to just take a second and look at a simple metal object around you right now. Maybe it's a gold ring on your finger, the copper wire that's currently charging your phone, or maybe even a rusty iron nail sitting out in the garage. Have you ever actually stopped to think about the immense, complex adventure those metals went through just to get to you? Today, we're taking metallurgy completely out of the textbook and into reality. We're going to uncover the incredible science of how we pull raw, stubborn rocks from the earth and literally transform them into the foundational materials of our modern world.
So let me ask you something right off the bat to kick things off. Do metals exist in nature in the exact same form we use them every day? Like, if you grab a shovel, march into your backyard, and start digging a massive hole, are you going to hit a deposit of perfectly shaped, shiny aluminum cans or neatly wrapped spools of conductive wire? No way, right? Almost all the metals we use are actually trapped deep within the Earth's crust, locked in this tight, rocky prison, entirely unrecognizable from the stuff we rely on. And unlocking them? Well, that is the magic of metallurgy.
Here's our game plan for today's journey. We'll start by hunting for everyday metals and ores, then we'll check out the different personalities of metals in the Reactivity series. After that, we're going to follow the three major steps of extraction: dressing the ore, extracting the crude metal, and finally refining it. And we'll wrap the whole thing up by looking at a metal's ultimate lifelong enemy, rusting and corrosion. Okay, let's jump right into Chapter 1, Everyday Metals and Ores, or as I like to think of it, finding the hidden treasure.
Now, there's a really important business distinction we got to make here between a mineral and an ore. A mineral is basically any naturally occurring element or compound in the Earth's crust. Aluminum, for example, is everywhere in the dirt, but we don't just scoop up any random pile of dirt to get aluminum. An ore is a specific type of mineral from which we can extract a metal profitably without losing a ton of money. Think of something like bauxite. It has this huge percentage of aluminum oxide, which makes it actually financially worth the effort to mine. So the bottom line is, all ores are minerals, but if it costs you way too much money to get the metal out, well, it's just a mineral, not an ore.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Reactivity series. This is all about understanding metal personalities, which is honestly one of the most brilliant concepts in chemistry. You see, chemical elements have totally distinct behaviors. Highly reactive metals, like potassium, sodium, and aluminum, are incredibly clingy. They absolutely love reacting with other elements, which means you will never find them just sitting alone in nature. They are always tightly bound up in complex compounds. Then you have your moderately reactive metals, like zinc and iron, which are usually found hanging out with oxygen or sulfur. But look down at the bottom of the list. Low reactivity metals, like gold, platinum, and silver, they are the loners of the chemical world. They're perfectly happy existing entirely on their own in a free or native state. And this personality completely dictates what we have to do next to get them out. So let's say we've dug up our profitable ore. What's next? We transition into Section 3, the first active phase of metallurgy, dressing the ore. This is simply about cleaning up the raw material. Before we get into the weeds, I want to give you a really simple 3-step roadmap so you never get lost in the scientific jargon today. Step 1, concentration, which is basically getting rid of the dirt. Step 2, extraction, pulling out the raw metal. And Step 3, refining, making it perfectly pure. Right now, we're starting right here at Step 1, getting rid of all that unwanted sand and clay, which chemists cleverly call gangue. This is where it gets really cool, because we're just using some clever physics to sort this stuff out. On the left side here, we have a froth flotation cell. If you have a sulfide ore, it has this really neat property. It doesn't like getting wet. So we crush it into a powder, put it in a giant bath of water and pine oil, and just blow air through it. The ore particles actually stick to the bubbles and float right up to the top as a froth, while the heavy, dirty gangue just sinks to the bottom. And on the right, we've got magnetic separation. If your ore is magnetic but the dirt isn't, you literally just run it over a magnetic conveyor belt. The dirt falls straight down into one bin, and the magnetic ore gets pulled over to the side. It's incredibly clever, right? Having cleaned up our ore, we arrive at Section 4, which is Step 2 of our roadmap, extracting the crude metal. This is the heavy lifting, breaking it out of its chemical prison. Now, remember those metal personalities we talked about a minute ago? This is exactly where they matter. You can't use the same lockpick for every chemical prison. For those clingy, highly reactive metals like sodium or aluminum, normal heat just won't cut it. We actually have to use intense electricity, a process called electrolysis, to forcefully rip them apart from their compounds. Medium reactivity metals like iron, they need to be roasted and then reduced using carbon. But the loner metals of low reactivity, often just applying some heat is enough to break their weak bonds. Let's actually look at a fascinating action-packed example of this from the real world. Sometimes we use a highly reactive metal to basically bully a moderately reactive metal out of its compound. What you're seeing here is the setup for the thermite process on a cracked railway track. They're mixing iron oxide with highly reactive aluminum powder. Boom. Once it's ignited, that aluminum aggressively steals the oxygen right out of the iron oxide. This is a highly exothermic displacement reaction, and the amount of heat it gives off is absolutely massive. It is essentially a controlled chemical explosion. The reaction generates so much heat, we're talking thousands of degrees here, that the newly freed iron is produced in a completely molten liquid state. And look at the final result. That completely molten iron flows directly into the crack of the railway track, instantly welding it together seamlessly as it cools down. We literally just extracted pure iron from a chemical compound right on the spot, using chemistry to fix critical infrastructure. Amazing, right? Okay, so now we transition to section 5, step 3 of our roadmap. We have our metal, but it's crude. It still has tiny bits of unreacted ore or other impurities mixed in, so it's time for refining and purifying, the final polish. This right here is electrolytic refining, and it's exactly how we get the ultra-pure copper needed for the wiring in your electronics. We take a big chunk of impure copper and make it the anode. That's the positive side of an electrical circuit. Then we put a super thin strip of totally pure copper on the other side, the cathode. When we turn the power on, pure copper atoms are literally pulled out of the impure chunk. They travel right through the liquid and perfectly deposit themselves onto the pure strip. And all those unwanted impurities, they just fall to the bottom of the tank as a sludge that metallurgists lovingly call anode mud. There are some other wonderfully inventive physical techniques for this too. Distillation evaporates low-boiling metals like zinc, leaving the junk behind. Liquation melts tin on a slope, so the pure low-melting metal literally flows away from the unmelted dirt. But honestly, my favorite has to be poling. Believe it or not, to purify blister copper, they will sometimes stir giant vats of bubbling molten metal with literal logs of green wood. The gases released by the burning wood actually help remove oxygen impurities. It is just this perfect, crazy blend of ancient technique and modern chemical science. So, we've pulled the metal from the earth, cleaned it, extracted it, and polished it to absolute perfection. But out in the real world, the journey isn't over. Let's introduce the last chapter of our explainer, Section 6, Rusting and Corrosion. This is the metal's ultimate, never-ending battle. Consider this for a second. Why would a massive steel bridge, holding thousands of tons, or critical components in industrial machines, just suddenly fail and collapse? The answer is corrosion. When metal returns to the environment, nature is basically trying to turn it right back into the compounds we just spent all this effort breaking it out of. And this isn't just an ugly cosmetic issue. Ignoring metallic corrosion has severe, dangerous, real-world consequences. So here's the crucial secret about the rusting of iron. Rusting is an electrochemical reaction that absolutely 100% requires both air, specifically oxygen, and water. If you put an iron nail in a sealed tube with completely dry air, it will never rust. If you take that same nail, put it in boiled distilled water, which has all the dissolved oxygen removed, and seal it with oil, again, it will never rust. It takes the teamwork of both moisture and oxygen to bring a metal down. But because we know its weakness, we have our defense strategies. We can block the air and water just by covering the surface with paint or chemicals. We can electroplate our iron with a tougher, unreactive metal. We can even use this wild electrochemical trick called a sacrificial electrode. By strapping a piece of highly reactive magnesium to our iron structure, the environment will actually attack the clingy magnesium first, literally sacrificing it to keep the iron bridge completely safe. And finally, we can use alloying to fundamentally change a metal's strength, which brings us to a massive aha moment. The number 24. We always hear about 24-karat gold as the ultimate, absolute standard of luxury, right? But here is the truth. 24-karat pure gold is actually incredibly soft. It bends and scratches so easily. If you made a ring out of pure 24-karat gold, it would warp totally out of shape just from you gripping a steering wheel. That's exactly why, especially in places like India, jewelers use 22-karat gold. They deliberately mix 22 parts gold with 2 parts of an alloy, like copper or silver. That tiny chemical mix radically changes the metal's properties, making it hard, strong, and durable enough to actually wear every single day.
And that, everyone, brings us to the end of our class today. So the next time you hold a 22-karat gold ring, or plug in a copper wire, or drive across a massive steel bridge, I really hope you won't just see a simple object anymore. I hope you'll see the dirt it came from, the chemical personalities that had to be outsmarted, the fiery explosions of extraction, and the constant, invisible battle against the elements it fights every single day. Will you see just an object, or the epic chemical journey it took to get there? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, stay curious.